Hey guys, this is Lucas from Better Coding Academy, and in this video I've gotten a few requests to show my directory structure, and this is obviously also something that is highly contentious, but nonetheless I want to make a video explaining the rough directory structure that I tend to go for when I'm designing a React application. So I've just got a little bit of a simple parcel thing going on here, and if you have a look inside of Chrome right now, it's just a counter. You can obviously increment this number and then go back down the other way. You can go into negatives and whatnot, but that's not really the point. It's just to showcase some functionality here. So I am using styled components inside of a root component that I've got here with a simple React hook to kind of just, decrement and increment the number. But what we're going to do is just add in a little bit of functionality after I go through and explain the current structure to you. And then I'll show you how I might extend this and how this is scalable into, I guess, something you'd consider to be more of a production scale application. So let's first have a look at what we've got over here. Pretty standard stuff at the top level, like a package.json. In this case, I've got a watch script set up for parcel, so parcel src/index.html. If you are using Webpack, then obviously this will be different. You'd use either Webpack dev server if you're running version 4, or I think from version 5 onwards it's Webpack serve, so you just do something like that for watch. I tend to use watch. Some people like to use dev. You'll find that at some companies and whatnot, what they'll actually do is something of this nature, so that way, you can use whichever one you prefer and there's really no conflict there. So it's just a great way to kind of ease the political tension, so to speak. I do have an alias set up. I do like to use aliases. I do like to use the hash symbol, and the reason for this is because the @ symbol refers to something like @Babel, so it's like an organization name for a package. You can leave it out as well, which is totally fine, but I don't like to do that because then potentially you can get clashes. For example, I might be referring to the config directory, or there is actually quite a popular package also called config, so I don't want to have that discrepancy there. So I like to put a hash in front of all of my aliases for that reason. I have a few dependencies here, and these ones are just pretty straightforward. I didn't actually even install these. I just kind of wrote them into my code, and then Parcel decided it wanted to install these. If I really wanted to fix this up, I'd probably get rid of that one and just do something like this, but that's just my personal preference, and really it's not about the dependencies here, so feel free to write whatever you want in this section here. So now looking into my application, my main entry point is index.html, and I do like to have this inside of the src directory, and the reason for this is that in this case, for example, for this file, we actually do kind of transpile this, or I guess not transpile, but kind of process it in some way. And in this case, we changed /index.js so that when you actually render it onto the page, it becomes a completely different URL. And that applies for any other imports that you do here as well. So what actually happens is this file gets run through with Parcel. And because of that, I think it makes more sense to have it as a source file as opposed to something which is truly public. So anyways, we start off here, and this one, as you can see, includes an index.js. And this is kind of the JavaScript entry point for my application. I've got a few things here just to showcase a little bit more of how I prefer to do things. I've got my global imports here at the top, and I do like to keep them in alphabetical order. So you see you got React and then React-DOM, and then styled components comes after R, obviously. And then you've got those three here, and then these ones here are also imported in alphabetical order. I've got a second group of imports, and this is definitely very intentional, and these ones are for my aliased imports. So if I have like hash root in this case, which I'm using here, you see I've got components first before config, and I'm doing those imports here in a separate group. I've got global style, and this one just creates the styles for me, just some basic stuff on the body, and then I've got a render method here, which one comes from React-DOM, and then this one here basically renders a theme provider with the theme that we've imported, and I'll explain the theme in a little bit more detail in just a sec, but then we have the global style inside, and then the root component, and we render it inside of the app. So this is pretty much kind of the starting bare bones structure for my app, and just a few things here I wanted to point out before we move on a little bit. So as you can see, all the global providers that I'll need for my application, so it might be theme provider, might be like browser router, for example. You might have like the Redux provider here as well, Apollo provider, all those things would go nested here, and I'd kind of just wrap this one time and time again for all of these contexts and things that kind of wrap around my whole application. So obviously, you do have providers that are kind of for part of your app only, and in those cases, I would only wrap that part of the app. But when it's something global and something I do expect to use over the course of my whole application, then I would put it over here where you can see it here. So I do also have global style here, and this is my preferred method for putting in global styles. This doesn't work for all cases. So in the case of actually importing fonts, one of the things in Styled Components version 5 is it doesn't actually support @import. So you have to do the link tags here, which is perfectly fine. I just copied these from Google Fonts and it works beautifully as well. We do include the background color and font family. As you can see, I do like to have alphabetical order here as well. I think that when you're coding, and especially as you try to continually improve yourself, it is really important that you focus on things that can really help you to take your code to the next level. And this is one of those things that I find really helps me, is really maintaining a higher than normal standard of code. And whether that is alphabetical props, whether that is just making your code that much more readable, that I think to me is a bit of respect that I can demonstrate to my colleagues and to other people reading my code. And definitely I think it's paid off with the feedback I've gotten, is that my code remains very legible even with very complex scenarios. And I think the best way to do that is just to make sure you have a strong foundation of rules upon which you can write your code. And that's kind of my basic reasoning for why I like to use alphabetical all over the place. But then again, feel free to, not do that and be a rebel. Whatever you want to do, that's totally up to you, obviously. So we have the background color here, and we've got the font family. We are rendering the root component. So root is kind of what I tend to go with for my, obviously, root of the application. I don't like to have the actual component inside of this file. I prefer to have my components all inside of the components directory, and I like to have a sort of hierarchical structure that I'll showcase there later on as well. But generally the root one I just call root because it's easier. If you're doing something more specialized, you can name it something else, but I generally just go with root just to make life easier for myself when it comes to naming. So now let's have a look at this theme I've got over here. So I'm doing an import to import all of the named exports here from root config theme. So I've got a config directory, which is generally where I put this kind of configuration. So in this case, I've only got a theme. Generally, this one stays relatively empty in the case of front-end components and all that kind of stuff and front-end apps. And the reason is because a lot of this configuration generally comes through stuff like .env or other ways of kind of importing the configuration. And the reason for that is because it generally gets configured on a build by build basis. There's a very little config, or I guess relatively little config, that kind of gets hard coded into application. But in the case where you have stuff like that and you just need a place to give it a bit more semantics, I reckon that this is the way that you should do it, is have a config directory inside of src. So I've got the theme file here, and you see I've got a single named export, and it just says export const jade, and I've got this color here. So what I've actually done is I've picked this color for my project specifically, and there's this website that I like to use, and I usually just search it by color, name, hue, and it usually just comes up. So this one here from colorblindness.com. I love this website for one reason in particular, which is that when you put in a color, it can give you back a name, and it doesn't apply for, I guess, all 16 million colors. It has like a rough range. So if I kind of go this way a little bit, as you can see, there are quite a few that are also jade. So if you do have colors that are quite similar, then you can obviously make up your own name. But for the most part, there are quite a few names that you can use for the different colors. And I do find that to be quite beneficial because then it takes the naming away from the colors, which is something, as you may know, naming is definitely something we spend too much time on as developers. So anything that we can use to take that away from us in a little bit definitely is beneficial. Anyways, so we have our colors here, and I like to do that way we can reference these colors and obviously reuse them where possible. So I've got that set up here for the background color here on this global style. So now let's have a look inside of root and see what we've got here. So we've got a button, and I won't get into the details of the styled components, but these are the styles for my button. This is the value in the middle, and this is the thing that kind of wraps around all of it. And you see I've got that controlled using a state, a simple bit of state logic here. So I've got that over here, and that's all very nice and very fine and dandy. But what I want to do now is add in a separate component for tracking the coordinates of my mouse. So what I'm going to do is create a separate component specifically for showing that. And I'm going to call this one probably something like, let's just do a mouse viewer, why not? So we can do something like that. And let's just import this one. So obviously this one doesn't exist yet, but we're going to add in the import there. Right click, I'm going to do new file. And I like to do mouseviewer/mouseviewer.js. So as you can see, I already copied the name, which is why I was able to do that. And I have a snippet set up here, which generates the component for me. I do have a video on that as well, so make sure to check that out in terms of setting up these snippets. And then let's create a new file, and I'm going to call this one index.js. And inside of here, I just write this one line, and this one allows me to import and export mouseviewer. Now, the reason I do this is so that I have each directory representing a single component. You can nest your components inside of other component directories, and the benefit of that is then in this case, you know that mouse viewer is only being used by root. If you have another component somewhere else in the tree, you know for a fact that that's not going to be using mouse viewer. So having this hierarchical structure, I think closely resembles the React tree, and hence allows us to better structure our code and maintain a more scalable solution as we go into the long term and into more professional sized projects. So now that you have mouse viewer here like this, the reason we have an index.js is so you don't have to do mouse viewer. I just think it's unnecessary, and I also think that it doesn't necessarily make the most semantic sense to be kind of diving into a directory to grab a specific file. Where possible, I like to have the idea of having /mouse viewer, so you don't even need to know whether it's a directory or whether it's a single file. It just kind of works, and it just works as is, and it's very encapsulated, and you try your best not to kind of dig into the implementation details and into the weeds, so to speak. So that's why I do that. But anyways, we've got mouse viewer set up here, and we've got it imported on the page. So now we should have that display over here perfectly. So now what I'm going to do is just apply some very basic styles to this one, and I'll keep this one relatively simple. But we're just going to create this thing called coordinates, and this one's just going to be a styled component. Oh, if I can spell that. And then const coordinates here, and this one's going to maintain pretty much the same type of styles as the other one, but maybe let's just do 4rem color white, 5rem maybe, and margin top, let's just do maybe 3rem like so. And let's just type in some coordinates or hello for now and see how that looks. Beautiful. Let's make it a little bit smaller, why not? Great. So now what we're going to do is we are going to create some basic logic so that when the mouse moves around the page, we can get the coordinates of the mouse relative to this corner here. So the way we do that is we can just put in a simple use effect for now. So we're going to have a use effect, and we can do something like this. And let's just create something called mouse chords, set mouse chords, and we'll create a bit of state for that as well. So we can do state, and then we can initialize it with x0, y0. Why not? We can obviously make this more complicated, but let's just keep the use case simple here. So we've got use effect and use state imported here as well, as you can see in alphabetical order. And what we're going to do here is set up a handle mouse move function. So handle mouse move is equal to, and then we're going to take in the EBT, and then we're going to do set mouse chords. We're going to do x is equal to ebt.page x and y is ebt.page y. So this will get us the x and the y, and we're going to do document.add event listener mouse move, and we're going to do handle mouse move like so, and then we're going to have a destructor which removes this. So we do document, and then we can do a remove event listener, and because we put this one in a function, so this was very intentional, is now we can add it here and we can remove it here, which makes it really, really cool. So now instead of writing hello here, we're going to write x, and let's just do a mouse chords.x, and let's just do y mouse chords.y. So something like that. And as you can see now I move around the screen, you can see that the x and the y values are constantly updating. As I get over here, it gets closer to 0, like so, and then as I get down here, the value increases. So that's working beautifully, and that's all fine. But what we're going to do now is, let's assume that we want to use this functionality in a more broader sense, and let's say we want to make it more reusable. So this in this case would be something very suitable for a custom hook. So where would we put something like that? Generally, what I like to do is have some sort of either utils or helpers. I generally go for the word helpers, so I do helpers here, and in this case, I like to have a directory called hooks. And then inside of here, we're going to create a hook specifically for this functionality. So we're going to call this one a use mouse position. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it use mouse, I guess, as well. But use mouse position is what I prefer. And then let's just do export default use mouse position like so. Just copy paste all of that logic in here. Just as a side note, one of the things I love about hooks is that it's so effortlessly easy to kind of separate them out, even after you've written them. So you can literally just grab all of this code here, and then as long as we just return the mouse chords like so, it works beautifully, and it just, you know, there's very little trouble when you're using it. So we've got use mouse position here, and we're going to import it up here. We're going to use hash root. So hash root slash helpers slash hooks slash this. Now, why do we use hash root and why don't we do like dot slash over into this file here? Well, there's actually a semantic reason as opposed to just being lazy, which I guess is a great reason as well. But actually having hash root allows us to have semantics to represent that this mouse viewer is a separate module to use mouse position. So wherever mouse viewer is inside of the application, regardless of where we put it, and in terms of directory structure, there is no relationship between this mouse viewer component and this use mouse position hook. So use mouse position, basically in this case, we are separating it and we're saying this is where you're always going to find it. Just like with styled components and just like with React, it doesn't matter where our mouse viewer component is, it should still be able to access React and it should still be able to access styled components. So you shouldn't have to do like, you know, dot slash and so on. And I think the same thing applies for this hook here, is that because the two are not closely related in the sense that they're not part of a bigger module, I think it makes sense to have it separate. And there's actually a semantic argument for using aliases as opposed to dot slash. But that's my reasoning there. We can just remove this now. And all we have to do is just do const mouse coords is equal to use mouse position like so. Once you've done that, you'll see that our code still works. So this is where I would put my hooks. And if you had any sort of functions that you needed to use, you can chuck them inside helpers as well. Generally, I like to have a little bit more kind of I guess structure inside of helpers as well, especially when you get into larger projects, you tend to have a lot more helpers. So you might have something like, you might have one specifically for managing data. And then this one you might have, like, just as an example, you might have a certain sorting algorithm. So you might have one for bubble sort.js, and that might go inside data. But generally inside of hooks, I like to have a subdirectory specifically for storing all the different types of helpers. And when I say helpers, I generally am referring to functions. In the case of hooks, I guess they are functions, but in a way they're also kind of different. But for most of them, I try to keep them as pure functions, which I think makes the most sense in this context. So we have use mouse position here, and then now we're showing this on the page, which is great. So now let's try and actually take out this counter here as well. And just to show how I might do that and how I might have multiple components inside of root. So I've already got mouse viewer, so I might have one specifically just called counter. So I'm going to call this one counter, and then right click, new file, and notice how I copied the name already. So I can just do something like this, very effortlessly create a new component, just like so. And then now that I've got counter there, I'm going to grab all of these styles for that component. And then I'm going to grab styled components here as well. Once you've done that, now inside of the counter, we're going to grab this whole section there, going to replace this H1, and paste that in there. And we're going to move over this use state as well. So very, very quick movements here. And I'm sorry if you kind of got lost along the way. But basically, it's really just moving stuff around, making sure it's in the right place, and then just going back and forth. So I've moved everything over. I've got the counter wrapper and put in all the styles. So I think this should work because we have use state and styled here as well. So as you can see, our component is still working beautifully. And just to show that this is indeed working and I'm not just messing around and showing the same thing, I'll do a plus 10 here, and you can see that we can obviously increment that by 10 as we've dictated here. So anyways, now we've got a bit of a hook over here, we've got some config, and we've got a few components. So if we were to kind of continue this into something broader, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that we want to have something that's a little bit more reusable. Like in this case, maybe our button, let's say instead of calling it counter button, we want to have something which is, I guess, like a transparent button, for example. So then in this case, we might actually just rename this to transparent button. And if we really want this to be a component, where do we put this component? Because we can't put it inside of root, obviously. If we're going to be using it all over the place, it doesn't make sense to have it specifically in root. So what I like to do is actually have a directory inside of here, and I call it shared, and then I would put that one over here. So I do transparent button here. And once again, I also still like to maintain that same type of directory structure. And the reason for this is specifically so that if we were to nest components or have, more complicated logic, doing so wouldn't require creating directories and messing around with all of that. In this case here, we actually don't need the React import because we do have styled components, and that's all it really is. So we might do a transparent button like so. And then we grab this line here, and I'm going to go here and do import transparent button from hash root components shared transparent button like so. So once again, because of we're using this absolute alias, it means that our component can be anywhere, and we can use any component to reference this transparent button here, which I think is a brilliant play in terms of semantics. So now you see we've got that over here, and it's working beautifully, and we can even go into mouse viewer and add in that button as well. So we could even go here, and we've got this coordinate set up here, but let's just say we want to add something to the end, and we'll just maybe make this one like what would we do for this one? Let's just say the word close, and let's put the transparent button around this as well. So transparent button. If you didn't know how I did that, it's Shift Option W. I am on a Mac, and I think this comes as default, so I didn't have to set up this keyboard shortcut. I'm pretty sure it is built in. But anyways, that just wraps it in a tag like so. We're going to do this over here, so we have that hook over there, and that was Slack pinging off for some reason. But yeah, so now we've got close over here, and let's just add in a little bit of clicky functionality, because why not? Let's just say we're going to hide this one. Probably spending way too much time on this, but anyways, we are going to be doing set is showing, and let's just do false, and let's add in a use state here. Let's go here, const is showing, set is showing, equals use state true. And you might be wondering how I generally structure and like organize these. There's really no alphabetical order when it comes to variables, because sometimes you need one before another. But in this case, I just generally like to have my states and my hooks at the top, and it just is like my config, so to speak, to kind of begin the whole thing. And I have my other hooks and other logic in the middle there. So that's just pretty much how I do it, but it's really quite fluid on this specific part of it. So let's just do is showing here. And if it is showing, obviously we can show this part here. Otherwise we will show nothing. And then what we're going to do here is just do is showing. So we actually toggle it. And then instead of showing close, we can do like say show and hide. So is showing, we'll do hide, and then otherwise we'll do show, obviously. So now let's save that. Let me zoom this out just a little bit so you can see the code. Should probably change the wrapping because the wrap's at 120 right now, and that's quite long. But yeah, so we've got hide over here, and we can click that. And this text is obviously quite large, and that's because of transparent buttons styles. I should probably change this so that it uses inherit for font size, actually. So now that inherits that one. This one isn't inherited because it doesn't have it. So we can just change that over here, move the font size over here, acknowledge that I am spending probably way too much time on this, but anyways, I'm enjoying it. So this is what you guys get. Put a little comment there. And beautiful. So now we have this hide, and it uses the same transparent button as this stuff over here. I can hide it and I can show it, and it works beautifully. I think it's brilliant. So I really hope that this has helped to kind of show how I like to structure my React projects. Once again, just to finish off on this note, is that I think it's incredibly important, whether you're a senior developer, whether you're have a lot of experience in writing code, or whether you're just starting out and just learning the ropes for the first time. Wherever you are falling on the spectrum, I think it's incredibly important in order for yourself to grow as a developer to really pay attention to these details and how you structure your code, how you put stuff together. Because a lot of the time I find it's the tardiness that really can hold you back, because people look at your code and then they just don't want to continue looking at your code. You might be brilliant, you might have a lot of potential, but if you can't explain that potential and display it in a way that showcases that, then I think many times you're going to fall short. So try not to fall short and try to come up with something that works well for you. These standards and the things I showcased today have worked really well for me in my personal projects and also in my line of work. So I hope that if you want, you can take this and you can feel free to use it, obviously. But if you want to do your own thing, that's totally fine as well. The only thing I would say is to recommend to be consistent wherever possible. So I hope you guys have enjoyed. Please make sure to like and subscribe if you want. This has been Lucas from Better Coding Academy, and see you guys later.